Welcome, listeners. Welcome, viewers. Here we are with another episode in the Trauma to Trust series. Really happy today to welcome Lillian Benrubi to our interview series. She's a psychotherapist with years of practice, but before I tell you more about her and she tells us her story, let us, Lillian and me, we want to set an intention for this conversation that we're going to have, that where we go in this conversation and in this interview is exactly where you, the listener and the viewer, needs to go today as you're listening to this in your healing journey. So with that in mind, I don't know, this just came up for me. For those of you who have been watching this series, you will see behind me there is a lamp. I always like the lamp up. There are several deities there, and the one right on top there is the goddess Kali, who is the personification of transformation, actually. So she's the person who encourages you to transform, even if it might means taking you through a difficult transition. So they're all watching, and we're in good company. So with that, let me invite Lillian. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us here on this interview. I'm really excited to talk to you. And for the viewers, Lillian has been in counseling for over 25 years. She was drawn to therapy from a very young age, and she trained to be a psychotherapist, and she's been doing that for a very, very long time. She believes that each person is resourceful and is resilient, and she sees opportunity in struggle or in difficulties that you meet in life. So when we're talking about trauma to trust, one of the things that you do as you make that journey from trauma to trust is to recognize how the trauma that you've experienced can be seen as a gift, and that is part of Lillian's philosophy. So she's sort of ideal for us in this interview series. So Lillian, thank you again for taking the time. Welcome.
And thank you, Srilatha. It's a very important topic, and it's an honor to be part of it.
Thank you. So all of my viewers and listeners know by now that I always start the conversation by asking you to describe your journey.
Sure.
And in this particular case, you're talking about the journey from trauma to trust, and yes, in reference to that topic.
Yes. Which is a perfect topic for me to be talking about because, I had sexual abuse in my background. And I don't recall when it started. There's a lot of details that I don't recall. And I've really come to the place where it doesn't really matter anymore. But nonetheless, I do remember that it ended at the age of 8. So I'm just going to step back a little bit. When I was a little girl, I was very drawn to helping people. And, I just had a very compassionate nature. I was very sensitive. I still am very sensitive, and have learned how to use my sensitivity to my benefit instead of allowing it to really kind of, move me off of my rock, right? Mm-hmm. So very early on, even before the sexual abuse, I had an occurrence, which I might talk a little bit later when I talk about the strategy. There was an event that happened with my mother that had me believe that the world was not a safe place. So I was not in a place of trust to begin with. And when the sexual abuse happened, of course, that just was more evidence of a belief that I had already created at a very young age. So, but what I do know is that if that didn't happen to me in my life, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. Mm-hmm. And I really do enjoy the person that I am today. And a lot of people around me enjoy and get the benefit of who I am today. And, that might to some sound like, that I'm boasting, but it's not that at all. It's been a very long journey to get to a place where I actually love myself. So, I was sexually abused by the time I was, the age of 8, it ended. And it had a huge impact on my ability to express my voice, to be seen, to allow myself to be seen. So I basically created a very small world for myself, because I didn't trust people, because I didn't think the world was trustworthy, and because I ultimately felt alone, right? So I had to make sure, that I navigated through this unsafe world with extra antenna, watching out, tuning in at every level, both visually, auditorily, kinesthetically, feeling wise, tuning in to what was safe and what was not safe, who was safe and who was not safe. And because of this belief that, people weren't safe, the world wasn't a safe place, I had to kind of close in the walls and leave very little space for a lot of people or a lot of different situations to enter my life, right? And by the time I was 13 years old, I had, some mentors along the way who were very compassionate and very understanding. And really, I could see through their eyes that they could see some other aspect of me, other than the one that I was present to and that I was damaged, right? Or that I was shameful, right? So these mentors could see something else that touched me and moved me. And by the time I was 16 years old, I went to see a therapist. He was a psychiatrist. I wanted him to be my husband and my father all at the same time, because he was, the kindest, most compassionate, most loving human being I thought at the time on earth. And so I saw him for a year. And again, here was somebody who was not only somebody, but a man who was able to see me for who I truly was. And that was the transformation for me. And that was my continued journey with coaches and with therapists. And it was also what cemented my passion to become a healer and a helper, right? So, from there, I moved on to, I decided at the age of 13 that I was going to be some kind of therapist, some kind of healer. And I went on to basically do really well in school and really focus on my academics so that I could get into post-secondary education, and became a social worker 6 years later. I took the long route because I wasn't sure exactly who I wanted to be or what form I wanted to be a healer. But 6 years later, became a social worker, and then went on to work in Canada. It's called the Children's Aid Society, right? So it's a child welfare agency. And it's very telling. I mean, here is my own personal experience, right? And I did a lot of work throughout my life to be able to overcome the beliefs and the feelings that come with that. And I had this gift to offer, which is my own personal experience of it, right? So I worked there for 13 years, and I think made, a lot of differences in people's lives as well as organizationally. And then at that point, I had my son and decided that, having a child and exposing myself to repeated secondary trauma was not a good fit. So decided to go into private practice. So here I am.
Beautiful. So a real illustration of moving from trauma to trust.
Absolutely.
Living a life of power, passion, and purpose.
Absolutely.
So you talked about mentors that you came across when you were around the age of 13. Were these people whom you could confide in? Did you have
Yeah, I didn't so much confide about the sexual abuse as much as, we had discussions about humanity. And in those discussions, what I was able to see was the possibility for non-judgment, for understanding, for compassion, right? So, in talking perhaps about others or their own situations, and that was kind of like the weird thing, at the age of 16 already, I was having adults talk to me about their situation, right? And, I wasn't particularly asking for it. I didn't necessarily start the discussion, but I think there was just something, perhaps, maybe I'm an old soul, you know, but there's just something, I guess, that they saw within me that left an opening for them to talk about their stuff. And so in these discussions, and they were powerful people in this world, right? They had, high paying jobs, they had lots of status and so on and so forth. I remember on the plane, a long plane ride of 13 hours on my own to visit my family abroad, somebody just sat beside me and just opened up their whole life to me, right?
Wow.
So, in those kinds of experiences, what I learned I learned about humanity,
Yeah.
and that other people went through their own series of traumas. And in that sharing of compassion and understanding and non-judgment, I got to see what was possible for me.
That's beautiful. And the fact that you were on this 13-hour plane journey and this person came and sat next to you
Yes.
is an illustration of how the world works, right? How the universe works, how God works, whatever name you want to give that.
Yes.
To make sure that you get all this, everything that you need to make your contribution.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Every little experience in our lives hones us to that direction that we need to take, right?
absolutely. And I was just listening again to a clip of the Tony Robbins movie that's where he talks a lot about life is not happening to you, it's happening for you.
Absolutely.
So even the fact that he had a very abusive mother, and if she hadn't been who she was, he wouldn't be who he is today, and how he thanks her for the role she played in his life. So,
Absolutely. I get the goosebumps every time I hear that, actually. That life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. So,
um, so like that's my definition of trust. I listeners have heard this again. I recently wrote a chapter on trust in a book, and my definition of trust is letting go, resting back, flowing with life, knowing that it's always unfolding in my favor.
mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, so when you reference this a little bit, let's talk to the viewers about the tools and processes that
Sure.
help you on your journey.
Okay. One of the very common tools that I use with people that I'm coaching or I'm in therapy with, that I found a very, very powerful transitional tool for me, started in about, I guess, 2006, was so it's a 3-part exercise. The very first part is looking at an event that happened to you in your life between the ages of 0 and 8. Because psychology or even neuro-linguistic programming, a lot of different theories have it that our roadmap for life gets cemented by the time we're 7 or 8, right? So if you can imagine going to a neighbor who has a child, a 7 or 8-year-old child, and actually paying them for their roadmap for how to do life, you would never do that. Right?
Yeah.
Yet we all do this. We all, by the time we're 7 or 8, decide we know how to do life now, right? And all of that is based on our experiences of life. And our experiences are not necessarily an accurate representation of what happens, right? Because we all have very different experiences watching the same thing happening. So, we also create some beliefs about ourselves that are untrue. So this is the exercise that I want to share with you, and I'm going to use an early example in my life to demonstrate how this works. So the very first part is what happened, right, in that event. And it has to be a pretty powerful event that had some sort of negative impact or powerful impact on your life. But we're dealing with limiting beliefs about ourselves, right? Yeah. So the very first part is to talk about what happened, but factually. So with no interpretation. So what you can do to try and make that work is to pretend that you're sitting beside me or somebody who is blind. You're watching a movie, they can't see what's going on. So you're literally just telling them what you're seeing, perhaps you're hearing, but not your interpretation of it, right? The second piece is, what did you make it mean? And then the third piece is, you know, what kind of being in life did you create for yourself as a result of that? So now I'm going to go into my story.
Yes.
So factually, what happened was I was 4 or 5 years old, sitting at the dining room table. My mother was in the kitchen doing the laundry. She had a laundry machine in the kitchen. And my mother was my whole world because, you know, she was a stay-at-home mom, and I spent every waking moment with her, right? So she was my world. She was my rock. She was my safety net, my security. She loved me and nurtured me. She, you know, was very devoted to being a stay-at-home mother. And so I'm blissfully coloring at the dining room table, and I look up and I see my mother sobbing over the laundry, over the washing machine.
Oh.
And so at that point in time, that was really kind of the pinnacle that I remember, where I decided the world was not a safe place. Because if my mother is my world, if there is no separation between her and I, and everything was okay, and when she's sobbing right now, things are not okay, that means things are not okay for me. So I don't feel safe, I don't feel secure, and I decided the world was not a safe place and that I was alone. But so factually, I can, you know, the story is that I was sitting at the dining room table, coloring, look up, see my mother crying. The story or the meaning that I created about it was that I was not safe and I was all alone, right?
Yeah.
And the third piece, the way of being that I created for myself, came out of noticing that my mother was sobbing. As a 4 or 5 year old, I think she's crying over the laundry, not what's going on in her life, right? So I go to help her, and, you know, the tears start to dry up. She starts to, you know, lift up in emotion. And so I realized that what I did had an impact, right?
Yeah.
And on top of that, it not only had an impact on her, but through her, it had an impact on me because we're so connected. So now my world is safe and secure again, right?
Yeah.
So my way of being in the world has been to be a helper with everybody or anybody, and especially in situations where I don't feel safe and secure, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, if I'm involved in an event or in a situation where perhaps that person is feeling unsafe and insecure, and as a sensitive person, I'm picking up that emotion, it starts to trigger an old belief that I'm not safe and secure. In order to deal with that, I go and help, and I deal with their sense of safety and security, and I deal with my sense of safety and security. So it becomes a very unconscious driving force, this, you know, this limiting belief about the world and myself. So that's an exercise that people can do for themselves. It takes a little bit of time, because if we don't look at life that way, if we don't even realize that we have stories about ourselves in the world, it's going to take a little bit of time to deconstruct that event so that you can, it's kind of like, you know, I tell people that it's kind of like an accordion opening. You know, when we're looking at the accordion, we're just looking at our story.
Yeah.
We open up the accordion, we deconstruct the parts, and we can start dealing with what happened that had us come to this belief, and is it really true, right?
Yeah.
So, so hopefully that helps your viewers and your listeners.
Okay. And so where do you go from there? So they deconstruct it, and they realize that this is the limiting belief.
Yes.
What happens after that?
Well, once you understand, you know, your limiting belief and the way that you're being, you can have various responses to it, right? For some of us, when we deconstruct that, you know, we feel perhaps very heavy-hearted, that we have perhaps lived a life of being one particular way, or having created a life based on that limiting belief. When we realize that limiting belief wasn't true, we start to look at some of the negative things, right, that have been created in our lives as a result of that. And that's what has us be heavy-hearted. Some of us, you know, just pop, you know, have a breakthrough. Oh my God, you know, I can't believe I made that belief up. I can't believe I made that story up. I can't believe it's not true. Oh my God, now I can create a new belief and a new story, so on and so forth. And neither one is right and neither one is wrong. I think when we become heavy-hearted, it's just time to perhaps, like a dog or a cat, lick our wounds, you know, and nurture ourselves and allow ourselves to feel sorry for ourselves, because that's okay, right? It's just a form of self-compassion and self-care. And to let that, ride through. But of course, if you have somebody to talk to, right, to soften the weight, and perhaps to help you see yet again an alternative way of looking at this, it is most helpful for sure, right? But nonetheless, the whole point of this exercise is to give you an opening, because we create meaning out of everything on this planet, everything that happens to us, right? And the truth of the matter is we can't possibly take in all of the information that's coming at us out of any event in order for us to have a real accurate representation of it anyway. So if we're going to make this meaning in this story up, maybe we can make this meaning in this story up by looking at what other possible meanings are there, right? So for me in that situation, the other meaning as an adult was that my mother was going through a really tough time. She was in a foreign country with no family, very few friends, staying at home, raising her children, right? I was the youngest of three. And she was feeling very lonely, but I had no concept as a 4 or 5-year-old that she even had a life outside of me. Right? So I can't come to that conclusion. But as an adult, I realized that it had nothing to do with me and how safe. I was incredibly safe. My mother, my mother's arms protected me for 4 or 5 years, right? And so it's like our brain needs to, the neurology needs to shift all of the things that caused our ways of being in the world, or created certain elements to be present or not present in our world. All of that needs to shift, and it takes time by looking at the possibility that there's another meaning to this or another story, right? And to just trust that our brain has a blueprint for health. We have a blueprint for where we're at, and it has a blueprint for health. And the evidence of that is the fact that your listeners and viewers are on this summit looking to move towards health, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Just something that came up when you were talking about it. As parents, for those of you who are parents and who are going through a difficult time, notice that you have an impact on children in your life, and a very healthy thing to do is have a little child who sees you crying or sees you upset, instead of brushing it away and saying that, oh no, I'm not upset, because that then is a lie that you're telling the young child, which makes it even more confusing. And so the best thing to do there is to be as truthful as you can to the little one. And we're digressing a little bit, but the viewers and listeners all know that we had a tragedy in our family recently where my nephew committed suicide. And he has a little nephew who's only about 4 years old, and my sister-in-law posted saying, how do you respond to the child who's asking you, where did he go? Where is he? I want to see him. And also questions like, sons don't die before their moms, do they? And my response to her was, the best thing for him is to tell him the truth, because he's already seen that truth. So to tell him, no, sons don't die before their mothers, is telling him that a truth in his world is false, which is very unsettling. So, I think because this came up, I think for children, it's really important when you are going through trauma, to be able to tell them that, yes, sometimes life sucks, but and I'm upset about it, but we are still safe. So there is a need to be completely honest with your children when you're going through these types of difficult situations. If you're able to do it, it doesn't mean that your child is ruined if you don't remember it, or if you can't do it. But it's something to keep in mind that
Yeah.
honesty is always.
And I can give you an example, Srilatha. I mean, just on Tuesday, I drive my kids to school in the morning, and we all got in the car together. And I had a morning where I was just very much to myself. I wasn't my usual, interactive and so on and so forth. And my daughter got in the car and she said, "Mommy, are you sad?" And I thought about it and I went, maybe. And I said to her, I said, and my past self would have wanted to protect her from that and said, no, everything's cool, everything's good. But I just said, you know what, I think I'm just feeling sorry for myself this morning because I've been working so hard this week and I haven't had any time for self-care. And I think I'm just really tired and it's coming out as feeling sad. Right? And that just had her feel, okay, Mommy's just feeling sad. She's feeling sorry for herself, but she's got it under control.
Yeah.
Right?
It has nothing to do with me. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's beautiful.
Okay.
So can you, this is the point where we talk about some real life examples where your clients.
Yes. So most recently, I guess, just this past week, I was working with a client who for the past year has been struggling to move out of an abusive relationship. And, she's young. She's, what I would consider young. She's about 30 years old. And she's been in this abusive relationship for about 3 years now. Yeah. And so the two of them actually came to see me together for a period of time because he was willing to address his aggressive behavior. But then they stopped seeing me for a little while. And then so I just continued to see her because he wasn't as committed any longer to moving out of this dynamic that, he has with her. And really what we did was a lot of work around her self-worth.
Yeah.
The lack of emotional demonstrative in her past, some traumatic incidences, although not necessarily sexual or physical abuse, but some traumatic incidences that she had when she was younger that had set her up to believe that she too is not worthy of everybody's love, but that there would be only a select few that would truly honor and not abandon her, right? So in other words, she felt so bad about herself and her past and all the stories that she made about herself. And sometimes we do things, in the world that aren't good things, right? But we have stories about that and about ourselves that make us a lot worse than, the incident actually warrants. So, she had this story and this belief about herself that she wasn't deserving of anybody and everybody's compassion and understanding and judgment. So she had to select only a few people in her life and she had to hang on them for dear life. Because if she didn't, she would ultimately be all alone. And what that did was set her up for this abusive relationship that was constantly, it moved from being abusive to being loving to being abusive to being loving, which is the cycle of abuse, right?
Yeah.
So every single time he was remorseful, he would cry, he would beg for her forgiveness, he would go through a period of time where he would just be so attentive and so loving. She would think, okay, maybe this time, right? And on top of that, it was also this background belief that she was not aware of that said, nobody else is going to accept me the way that he does, because he's seen me at my worst. He knows me in and out. And so for me to start over again with somebody else means that I have to go through that torment of allowing myself to be seen when I don't really like myself to begin with somebody new. So we're at a point now where she's broken up with him, right? She hasn't had any contact for a month and a half. So she's gotten to a place where she likes herself enough, or at least she's in a place where she's willing to entertain that those are stories and not the truth, right? So that she can take care of the part of her that really, really fears being alone and abandoned. And she's starting to date somebody else.
Oh, nice.
Yes. Who so far is a lot more attentive and a lot more loving. So with every deconstruction of limiting beliefs, in our stories. And when we start to see a possibility for ourselves, we open up the possibility for new people to enter our lives, right?
Yes.
Right.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
It's so encouraging.
To me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what a service, right? What a joy to be able to give that kind of support to someone and help them move through that.
And to start that at an earlier age.
Yes.
Yes.
So, Lillian, you also have a gift for our viewers?
Yes.
Confident about that?
Yeah, it's a 30-minute gift, which I think the viewers will have on their email, I guess, for the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a 30-minute strategy call to really talk about where you're at, and where you'd like to be and how to get you there.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's free, and you just have to click on the link, and it'll get you to the calendar, and you can set up a time that works for you.
Awesome. And you, so you have a website that's also part of the email, and it'll also go on the Facebook page.
Okay.
You'll be invited to be part of the Facebook page. And what sort of things do you do? What kind of services do you offer? Do you have individual coaching? I know you're a therapist and also a coach.
Yes. Yeah.
I think about both those.
Sure. So, with, I guess in terms of what's relevant to your viewers, it is, the therapy and the coaching.
Yeah.
Right? So it all depends. I mean, generally I don't want to say generally. So some people are very specific about the fact that they just want therapy. They don't want to be coached, right?
Yeah.
Because coaching is about really ultimately moving you forward, right, to the goals that you want. Therapy in and of itself is allowing you to just, it's, my job to hold the space for you to process, right, what it is, where it is that you're stuck. But some people like a combination of both.
Okay.
So, I generally just cater it. I mean, I really believe that the person that I'm helping is the expert on their own needs. May not necessarily feel so at first, in which case I help guide them to figure it out, what it is that they need to really get connected with their intuition so that it guides them to figure out what it is that they need. And then we develop a program based on what it is that their needs are.
Okay.
Okay.
And do you do any group programs?
Not yet.
Okay.
I won't be starting that until later on in the year in September.
Okay. And you are in Ontario, right?
I am, yes, in Toronto, Ontario.
Toronto. And can people, do you do Skype sessions or Zoom sessions like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I do Skype sessions, Zoom sessions, phone sessions, whatever works. I find that some people really do not want to see or look at their coach because they get distracted by the visual. And some people need the visual in order to connect. So whatever works.
Okay. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So we have, you can either, is there something else? Is there another story that comes to mind right now or for you?
I think the only thing that I thought that maybe I would add when I was talking about my own personal journey is just to add that, it wasn't just working through the sexual abuse, or the trauma. It, all of the, beliefs and the stories that I had about myself manifested a long-term relationship that was not a healthy relationship as well, right? Yeah. But all of that was an opportunity for me to really ultimately look in the mirror and to see what it is that I'm manifesting because of my limiting beliefs and my stories, right? And I loved the man dearly, and we still love one another. We're separated. Yeah, that's okay. And we still love one another. But what we were doing was actually manifesting all of the stuff that we hadn't yet dealt with, right? Yeah. But once we start dealing with all of that stuff, what was possible for me now is to currently be in a 2-year, very secure, very safe, very loving, and growing relationship where we are committed to the same values. And we challenge each other, right?
Mhm.
And we call each other on our stuff. So if we're noticing with one another that, there's some sort of background belief, or thought that's limiting us in our lives or in our relationship, we're giving each other permission to call each other out on it. Doesn't mean we have to take it on right away, but we're giving permission to do that. So for me, that's a huge step, right, forward compared to where I was coming from. But I just want people to know that when you do your inner work, when you really get who you are, when you work with somebody who sees that, then anything is possible.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any final last words that you think you need to wrap this up? I think what you just brought up is so important, that you might think that working on a particular area of trauma only has repercussions in that area, right? But when you begin to open yourself up and learn to become more self-aware and become much more open to healing and willing to do the work, the rewards of it are
Huge.
huge. Yeah.
Absolutely. So those would have been my last words, actually.
Beautiful. Actually, one of the last interviews that went out was with a lady called Tonya, and she's also a psychic kind of person who gets messages as she's talking. And one of the messages that came through to her was that the energy in each of these interviews is very powerful, and there's a lot of healing energy there.
Beautiful.
I just wanted to reiterate that those of you who are listening and watching, be in this space without distractions, without your iPhone, without your iPad, and don't multitask. This is the space for you to be healing yourself. Give yourself that gift.
Absolutely.
So, Lillian, thank you once again. It's been such a pleasure to have you on this summit.
Thank you. You took the words out of my mouth. It was a pleasure talking to you too, Srilatha. You're welcome.